I'm here today with Chris Olson, and we're going to talk about his book, Empowered. Can you just tell me, why did you write this book? Was there a pivotal moment or like a need that you saw in the church or in the community, and what really inspired you?
Yeah, sure. So in my studies on leadership, I came across a concept known as leadership power. And what leadership power is basically a vehicle or avenue that a leader uses to influence their people and drive positive results, whether it's leading change in an organization or driving dollars to a bottom line in a business or even motivating volunteers in a church. They use these five forms of influence, if you will, normally to accomplish these goals. And I noticed how each one of those forms of power coincide with specific leadership traits that are typically displayed by leaders from around the globe. In particular, the work of Gert Hastidi and Robert House in the Globe Study and other cultural leadership sources created leadership clusters where certain groups from around the world, culturally speaking, expect certain things from their leaders. It was very insightful. But in continuing my studies, even at a Christian university, you often find sometimes not everything that you read is necessarily from a Christian worldview or even an apostolic worldview for that matter. And so I always had an issue with some of the leadership theories and models that I was learning because they typically centered around the leader as the all knowing guru and seat of authority. And as a Christian leader, I knew where my source came from, and it's not myself. It's the Lord, obviously, and so I always had an issue with those theories. Well, I was reading in my Bible Psalm 72 one day, and I came across verses 6 and 7. Promotion cometh not from the east, the west, or the south. It comes from God, basically paraphrasing that. And all of a sudden it hit me. And I believe God recalled to my remembrance the things that I learned about leadership power, and He let me draw parallels to the clusters, cultural clusters around the world. And I knew at that moment that I had a book idea. And so through much prayer, um, Empowered was born. And I had probably in that experience the most clarity I've had in a while at that time. And I knew where my source came from. I knew that there was no powers that are in place other than those that are allowed by God. But in that moment, God showed me that even nature itself and the cultures of the world follow that.
Very good. How did you find the time? Like you
Yeah.
found this inspiration for the book. How did you figure out how to fit writing and authoring and putting all your thoughts together into your busy life?
Yeah. So the struggle is real, right? Everyone's strapped for time these days. Everybody's so busy. Um, and if I had let that become a roadblock, then Empowered would have never been written. So there's no other way to do it than just make time and schedule it, write it. Um, there are different times where I found writer's block, and I would have to take a break. And you know, sometimes I would be inspired at the most inopportune times. And I would have to start writing during those times. You just have to make yourself do it, and there's no real formula on how to write either. Um, you write it, and if you let God be your inspiration, you let Him lead you. And I used freelance editors and content artists for the interior and exterior, so you don't necessarily have to worry so much about grammar and all that. You can take care of that on the back end and just write it. Just write and let your ideas flow and go from there.
All right. What's one big takeaway? So anybody picks up your book, if there was one thing that you hope that they could walk away with after reading Empowered, what would it be?
The one big takeaway that I would say Empowered contains is no matter where you lead or in what capacity you lead, you are allowed to do so by God. Whether it's in a spiritual context or a secular context, it doesn't matter. Whether you believe in God or not, God is still God, and He sits on the throne and He promotes who He wants when He wants. He is sovereign. He doesn't need anybody's permission to do that. And so, what we have to understand is leadership is a gift, and we are stewards of that gift. We have to recognize that the source of our leadership is not our own talents and abilities, it's God. He is our source. We use our gifts and our talents that He gives us, those abilities that He blesses us with, but we use that to exercise the office of leadership to give Him glory and to lead people closer to Him and make them better people. That's what leadership is really all about, is to bring people closer to God. It's not about us, it's about Him and how we can give Him glory.
Awesome. That's so true. And if you could sit down to dinner with anybody, past, present, or future, who would it be and why?
That's a great question. There's so many. Being a leader, being a writer, being a minister. There's so many that I could pick. I would obviously want to sit down with, some of the great patriarchs of the Old Testament, like Abraham and Moses, and talk to them about how they pioneered spiritual leadership of God's people. Overcoming all the challenges that they faced, but also something that it's always amazed me, and I don't know that a lot of people think about it, but what's really amazed me has been the silent leadership of the scribes throughout the history of the Old Testament in particular. They were in the background, privately preserving the Word of God for us. No accolades, no
Mm-hmm.
protests, no demands. Their reward was the Word of God and the work that they did for God. And I think leaders today could use a little bit more of that attitude. They persevered through wars and famines and exiles and governments, and they still remained faithful to the calling and the duty that was entrusted to their care. How did they stay motivated through it all and give us the preserved Word of God to have in our time? It's amazing to me, and I would love to sit down with them and talk to them about their personal experiences and the time that they had alone with the Word of God as they dipped the quill of the pen into the ink and began to transcribe the Word of God. It had to be powerful.
Yeah, that would be. So, and people can get your book on, I picked it up on Amazon. Is that where you usually point people to get a copy of Empowered?
Yes, Amazon is available there, and it's also available at PPH.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation.
Well,
And
thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.